Family, hear this clearly. Rest is not quitting. Rest is trusting. Some of you are tired not because you're lazy, but because you've been trying to do God's job with human strength. You've been carrying what was never meant to sit on your shoulders. When God tells you to rest, He's not saying nothing is happening. He's saying everything that matters is already in motion. You see, we panic when we can't trace God's hand, but faith teaches us to trust His heart. While you're losing sleep, heaven is still working overtime. While you're worrying about timing, God is aligning systems, people, and purpose behind the scenes. Rest doesn't mean the promise disappeared. Rest means the promise is protected. Some of you are frustrated because you planted seeds and expected fruit the next morning. But God doesn't rush harvest. He perfects them. Delay is not denial. Silence is not absence. And waiting is not wasted time when God is in charge. What God has spoken over your life does not need your anxiety to survive. It needs your obedience and trust. The same God who opened doors you didn't knock on is the same God who can finish what He started without your interference. So rest, not because the problem is small, but because your God is big. What He promised is still on schedule. What He started is still underway. What you've been praying for is coming. Rest is one of the most misunderstood instructions God ever gives. When we hear the word rest, we often think it means stopping, quitting, or giving up. But rest is not retreat. It is faith in action. Rest is what you do when you have done everything God asked you to do, and now you trust Him enough to do what only He can do. It takes more faith to rest than it does to run, because running makes us feel useful, while resting forces us to rely. Many people are exhausted not because life is hard, but because they refuse to release control. They pray, but they don't rest. They believe, but they still panic. They say they trust God, but they keep checking the situation as if God might forget. That kind of tension doesn't come from the problem. It comes from trying to manage an outcome that belongs to God alone. Rest is the moment you acknowledge that you are not the source, the solution, or the savior. Faith-filled rest says, I've obeyed God, so I'm not going to manipulate results. It says, I planted the seed, but I won't dig it up every night to see if it's growing. When you rest, you are declaring that God's power does not depend on your pressure. You're admitting that your worry adds nothing to His ability. In fact, rest exposes whether you truly believe God is sovereign or whether you just like the idea of Him being in charge as long as you still get to supervise. Rest also requires humility. It means accepting that you don't know everything, can't fix everything, and were never designed to carry everything. God never asked you to figure out the future. He asked you to trust Him in the present. Yet many believers wear stress like a badge of honor, as if anxiety proves responsibility. But worry is not wisdom. And exhaustion is not evidence of faithfulness. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is stop striving and sit still. When God commands rest, it is often because striving is about to interfere with His work. Human effort can become an obstacle when it refuses to step aside. Rest clears the space for God to move without competition. It shifts the focus from what you can do to what God has already promised to do. Faith doesn't demand signs every day. It remembers what God already said and stands on it. Rest also reveals where your confidence truly lies. If your peace disappears the moment circumstances don't change, then your faith may be anchored in outcomes rather than in God Himself. But real faith rests even when nothing looks different, because it trusts the character of God more than the conditions of life. It understands that God is not rushed, threatened, or confused by delays. What feels urgent to you is already accounted for in His plan. Choosing rest is choosing to believe that God is working even when you cannot see progress. It's believing that unanswered prayers are not ignored prayers. It's trusting that God can accomplish more in one moment of His favor than you can in years of anxious effort. Rest is saying, God, I will not exhaust myself trying to replace you. Rest also protects your spiritual clarity. Anxiety clouds judgment. But rest sharpens discernment. When you slow down, you hear God more clearly. When you stop forcing doors open, you gain the wisdom to recognize the ones God is opening for you. Faith-based rest allows you to respond instead of react, to move when God says move, and to wait when he says wait. This kind of rest is not passive, it is intentional surrender. It's a daily decision to hand God what keeps trying to crawl back into your hands. It's waking up and choosing trust again, even when yesterday's fears return. Rest doesn't deny reality. It simply refuses to let reality replace God as the final authority. In the end, rest is your quiet confession. God, I believe you are who you say you are, and you will do what you said you would do. And that belief, lived out, not just spoken, is one of the strongest expressions of faith there is. Waiting has a way of making people uncomfortable, especially when nothing seems to be happening. We live in a world that measures progress by movement, noise, and visible results. So when God goes quiet, we assume he is gone still. But waiting in God's economy is never empty time. What looks like inactivity to us is often the most productive season in the spiritual realm. God does some of his deepest work in silence, because silence forces trust when sight is unavailable. When God asks you to wait, he is not putting your life on pause, he is positioning it. While you're focused on what you can't see, God is arranging what you don't yet understand. He is aligning people, timing, resources, and circumstances in ways that no human planning could accomplish. Waiting is not God forgetting, it is God preparing. And preparation always happens before manifestation. One of the hardest parts of waiting is resisting the urge to interfere. We feel the pressure to help God out, to move things along, to create opportunities instead of allowing God to open doors. But forced doors lead to unnecessary battles. When God opens a door, no resistance can stop it. Waiting protects you from stepping into something before you're ready or before it's safe. What God prepares you for in private will sustain you in public. Waiting also shapes your character in ways immediate answers never could. If God gave you everything instantly, you might receive the blessing but lack the maturity to manage it. Waiting builds patience, endurance, and spiritual depth. It teaches you how to trust God's voice over your emotions. The delay refines your motives and exposes whether you want God's will or just his benefits. What you become while waiting is just as important as what you're waiting for. God works in layers. While you're asking him to change the situation, he may be changing you. While you're praying for relief, he may be developing resilience. Waiting is not wasted time because God never focuses on outcomes alone. He focuses on formation. He's not just concerned with where you're going. He's invested in who you are when you get there. The waiting season also teaches you to listen. Noise often drowns out discernment, but stillness heightens sensitivity to God's direction. When movement is restricted, prayer becomes deeper. Scripture becomes more personal. You begin to recognize God's voice not just in answers, but in presence. Waiting trains you to depend on God daily. Instead of only during emergencies, God's timing is rarely early and never late. What feels delayed to you is often right on schedule in heaven. God sees the full picture, the obstacles you can't see, the consequences you can't predict, and the connections that must be in place. Waiting protects you from consequences you're not prepared to handle yet. What you think is slow is often God being careful. Even when nothing appears to be changing, something is always shifting. Faith grows stronger when it is tested by time. Waiting stretches belief beyond comfort and turns hope into confidence. You begin to trust God not because things are working, but because you know he is faithful. That kind of faith doesn't collapse when circumstances shift because it's rooted in God's character, not his speed. Waiting also reminds you that God does his best work beyond human observation. Just as seeds grow underground before breaking the surface, God often completes the most important work where you can't see it. By the time the result shows up, the work has already been done. Waiting teaches you to trust the process without demanding proof at every step. In the waiting, God is handling details you would never think to pray about. He's solving problems before they arise and closing paths that would have led to regret. Waiting is evidence that God is involved at a deeper level than you realize. And when the moment finally arrives, you'll see that the silence was not empty, it was full of divine activity. Delay has a way of making people question everything, God's promises, their own worth, and even the direction of their lives. When what you believe God has spoken does not happen on your expected timeline, doubt begins to whisper that maybe it was never meant for you. But delay is not the language of denial. It is often the language of development. God's promises are not fragile. They are not canceled by time, pressure, or human misunderstanding. If God spoke it, time does not erase it. We often confuse God's timing with our urgency. What feels late to us may be intentional to Him. God is not governed by clocks, calendars, or cultural expectations. He operates with purpose, not panic. Delay allows God to bring things together in a way that produces lasting fruit rather than temporary success. What arrives too early can collapse under its own weight. Delay is often God's protection, not His rejection. A promise delayed does not mean a promise weakened. In fact, time often strengthens what God intends to deliver. Delay gives space for faith to grow roots instead of leaves. Shallow faith thrives on quick results, but deep faith learns to stand when nothing seems to move. The longer the wait, the deeper the trust must go. And that depth prepares you to steward what God is bringing without losing yourself in it. Delay also exposes false substitutes. When the real thing takes time, there is always temptation to settle for something easier, faster, or more convenient. But shortcuts may satisfy impatience while sabotaging purpose. God delays because He refuses to give you something that looks like the promise but lacks its power. What He has planned will not require you to compromise your values, your calling, or your identity. There are moments when delay feels personal, as if God is singling you out for disappointment. But delay is often evidence that your assignment carries weight. The greater the responsibility, the greater the preparation. God does not rush what carries impact. He is intentional about when and how His promises unfold because they are connected to more than just your comfort. They are tied to His glory and the good of others. Delay also teaches discernment. It trains you to recognize God's hand even when He moves slowly. You learn to distinguish between divine patience and human procrastination. God's delays are purposeful. They are filled with instruction, correction, and alignment. While you wait, God is refining your perspective so that when the promise arrives, you recognize it clearly and receive it correctly. Sometimes delay is not about you at all. God may be waiting for other pieces to fall into place. People to be ready, circumstances to align, or environments to change. What you see as a closed door may be God preventing you from stepping into a season before the conditions are right. Delay ensures that when the promise is revealed, it arrives with stability instead of chaos. Delay also strengthens obedience. It teaches you to keep doing what God asked even when there is no immediate reward. Obedience that only lasts as long as results appear is not obedience. It's negotiation. Delay purifies your motives and anchors your faith in God's word rather than in quick outcomes. It proves that your trust is not conditional. What feels like a long wait is often a season of unseen progress. God is not slow. He is thorough. Every delay has a reason, and every promise has a purpose. When the timing is right, what God has spoken will arrive intact, complete, and undeniable. The delay will make sense. Not Beck? Ours, the wait was easy, but because the outcome will show that nothing was lost, wasted, or forgotten along the way. Many people believe that breakthrough requires pressure, stress, and constant mental strain, as if God responds best to exhaustion. There is an unspoken assumption that if you are not worrying, you are not being responsible. But anxiety has never been a prerequisite for divine movement. God does not need emotional turmoil to activate his power. He is not motivated by panic, and he is not impressed by stress. Breakthroughs come from alignment, not anxiety. Anxiety often disguises itself as concern, but there is a difference between being aware and being overwhelmed. Awareness invites wisdom, anxiety steals peace. When worry takes over, it clouds discernment and leads to impulsive decisions. Instead of waiting for God's direction, anxiety pushes people to act prematurely, to speak out of fear, or to grab control when they were meant to trust. Anxiety creates noise, and noise makes it harder to hear God clearly. God has never required his people to be frantic in order to be faithful. Throughout life, his instruction has always been rooted in trust, obedience, and stillness. Anxiety, on the other hand, pulls the heart in the opposite direction. It focuses on worst-case scenarios instead of divine promises. It magnifies uncertainty while minimizing God's faithfulness. When anxiety leads, faith takes a back seat, and spiritual clarity begins to fade. Breakthroughs are not birthed in chaos. They are released in alignment with God's will. Anxiety may make you feel like you're doing something, but it rarely produces lasting results. In fact, anxiety often drains the very strength needed to sustain what God is about to release. God is not just interested in getting you to the breakthrough. He wants you to remain whole once you get there. A breakthrough that costs your peace is too expensive. Anxiety also places an unhealthy burden on the soul. It convinces you that everything depends on you, your decisions, your timing, your ability to fix things. But that belief directly contradicts faith. Faith acknowledges responsibility without claiming control. It understands that God invites participation, not domination. You are called to be faithful, not frantic. When anxiety dominates, prayer becomes strained. Instead of conversations rooted in trust, prayers turn into repeated pleas fueled by fear. But God responds to faith, not desperation. He honors trust, not turmoil. Calm confidence in God's character opens the door for peace, and peace creates the environment where God's direction can be clearly received. Anxiety also shortens perspective. It locks attention onto the immediate problem and ignores the bigger picture. Faith, on the other hand, stretches vision beyond the present moment. It remembers past victories and trusts future promises. Anxiety forgets what God has already done and questions what he said he would do. Faith holds both in balance and rests in God's consistency. Letting go of anxiety is not denial of reality, it is recognition of authority. It acknowledges that God sits higher than the situation and sees further than human understanding. Peace does not mean the problem disappears. It means the problem no longer controls you. And when peace returns, clarity follows. God works best in hearts that are surrendered. Nen, OT stressed. Anxiety may demand attention, but it has no power to produce results. Peace, however, anchors the soul and aligns it with heaven's perspective. When you release anxiety, you are not lowering your expectations. You are placing them where they belong, in God's hands. Breakthrough does not require sleepless nights or constant worry. It requires trust, obedience, and a heart that believes God is able even when circumstances say otherwise. Anxiety adds nothing to God's ability, but peace positions you to receive what he has already prepared. There is a powerful assurance that comes from knowing that once God begins a work, he does not abandon it midway. Human effort often starts with enthusiasm and ends with fatigue, but God's work is not dependent on emotional energy or changing circumstances. What he initiates, he sustains. What he sets in motion, he brings to completion. This truth brings stability to faith, especially in seasons when progress feels slow or uncertain. Many people struggle because they assume that God's commitment to his promises fluctuates based on their performance. When they make mistakes or experience setbacks, they fear that the promise has been revoked. But God's faithfulness is not fragile. His ability to finish what he started is rooted in his character, not your consistency. While obedience matters, God does not abandon his purposes every time you fall short. His plans are stronger than your imperfections. When God starts something, it is always intentional. He does not act impulsively or without foresight. He sees the end from the beginning and accounts for every obstacle along the way. Nothing surprises him. No delay, no resistance, no detour.
I'll be all right. You don't have to stay. If you've already chosen, I won't stand in your way. I can feel it in your distance, in the way you barely speak, like your heart is somewhere else now, somewhere I can't reach. I was trying just to hold us while you slowly slipped away. Now I'm left with all the silence you didn't want to say. Maybe I just held on to something already gone. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine. Don't look back, I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. We don't need to fake the feeling, I can see it in your eyes. There's no reason left for staying when the love already died. Through the quiet in your voice, I can hear your choice. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine. Don't look back, I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. I don't need a reason why, I can see it in goodbye. And it breaks me, yeah, it does, but I won't ask you to stay. I'll be fine, you can leave. You don't owe me anything. If your heart has found a way out of what we used to be, I'll be fine. Don't look back, I'll survive this empty space. Not tonight, maybe not soon, but I'll learn to be okay. I'll be all right.